insider trading is not a solitary crime ordinarily. You have to cultivate information from somewhere. Theoretically, and I think Paul would support me on this, you could do it by yourself, theoretically. But ordinarily, you'll be in concert with at least one other party. In this instance, what the conspirators did, and bear in mind, I think there's 26 people charged in that investigation, 19 have pleaded guilty, and wiretaps. So telephone conversations are critical evidence in the case. But they bought prepaid telephones. And in one instance, one particular instance, the numbers programmed in were you and me, just two numbers, and they were in the address book, you and me. And at the end of a particular operation, they took the SIM cards out, bit them in half. So, you know, we had a nice breakfast. These guys are chewing SIM cards. And what the prosecutor says in respect to that, there should be a moment, hopefully before you're holding a bag of cash delivered to you by somebody codenamed Octopussy, because that was a code name for one of these guys, Bond movie style, that causes anyone in position to tip or trade on inside information to think twice before taking such a misguided step. You know, so the phone had two program numbers, and if you find yourself chewing the memory card in your cell phone to destroy any records of your misconduct, something has gone terribly wrong with your character and your life. Common criminality, that's where it appears in our markets, not the drug trafficker, not the armed robber, but the actual conduct of our sophisticated, very intelligent, billionaire hedge fund traders, our own salespeople, research people, traders, smart, university-educated people, but behaving like common criminals. Share ramping. I actually submitted a suspicious activity in respect of this. What happened in this instance, it was a corporate finance piece of business where there's a European major company that has a US branch, and it was the US bankers seeking to generate more business with the US branch or the US subsidiary. And the US client didn't have a lot, but said, you could help us out. We have one of our own customers seeking to buy £6 million worth of packaging machinery, $60 million worth of packaging machinery. I emphasize the dollars, and they need an account. Could you help them, please? And for some reason, even though it was dollars, the account was to be opened in London, where I was a money laundering reporting officer. The client company was a Delaware company. Any money laundering reporting officers in the room, as well as heads of compliance? Many people wear two hats. Delaware is an acronym. It stands for dollars, euros, laundered and washed at reasonable expense. The documents I looked at, we had two passports for the same guy, and it turns out the actual director, beneficial owner of this company, was in fact the chief financial officer of the publicly traded company. So I didn't have a client. I had the company setting up a transaction, be it genuine or fictitious, with a Delaware company to sell £6 million worth of stock. Now, I'm one bank. Imagine this is taking place for 5, 6, 7 or 8 other banks. You've got your order book manipulation, you've got the business doing well, the share price going up. Is he about to exercise his options? And the answer is, I don't know. You don't know. But the question is, are there reasonable grounds to suspect? Yes, there are reasonable grounds to suspect, because the transaction's not genuine. It's very smelly. It's not what I'm told, it's what I'm not told that causes me to have alarm. And of course, many of you are looking at me thinking, that actually could have been to pay a backhand or a bribe. I agree. But as a money laundering reporting officer, as against a public sector police officer with more powers, I'm limited in what I can see. Yes, I do use my imagination, but at the same time, I use my prior experience and expertise and knowledge to apply to this scenario. And it could well have been that these people were manipulating their order book to increase their share price before exercising an option. And we all know of the dot-com era, and Michael will present on cases, and Michael, I'm sure, would support my statement that the email has become one of the most compelling and effective pieces of evidence in white-collar criminal trials, and also white-collar civil trials. You know, I recall an instance with a lawyer and a QC. They were creating backdated trust deed documents for a money laundering scam for a client who'd been caught out with his money in the Bahamas. He was Canadian, and the QC asked the lawyer to create a backdated trust deed document, and he did. And the QC, and this is all on email, and we have the whole file. And the QC wrote back and said, "That's excellent." He said, "But I'm sure they didn't have word processors in 1988. Can you get it done at read on a typewriter?" Which we did. What the email does, it's an extension of thoughts. So what you would normally say out of your mouth, you put onto an email. And you leave it there forever. It doesn't disappear. It can be traced, and it will be used against you. Or those you work with, because you're all good guys, of course, right? You're the compliance officers. And now we have manipulating the bond market, and some of you may have knowledge of Bank of America has become a cooperating witness with the US authorities. Municipal authorities in America were issuing bonds, and that could be the public sewage works of Detroit. That could be the public metro of New York. It could be the local authorities. It could be the teachers union, etc., etc. Anybody issuing a bond to raise capital to spend on public infrastructure. And what happened in this instance, there were a small number of brokers who cornered and manipulated that market. And they said, okay, this is Bank of America's deal, but what I need, Michael, you're at JP Morgan Chase, I need a bid from you at 32.5. Paul, I need a bid from you at 32.55 because actually Martin's going to get it at 32.4. There was no competitive tender. It was a manipulated market. Okay, is that insider dealing? At that point, no, but the bonds are going to be traded. And the customer is the public. The customer is the taxpayer in those municipalities. Now, I see in the paper last night that our authorities may be issuing municipal bonds. And my dad was very much a blue-collar guy and subscribed to the theory, when America sneezes, we get a cold. And actually, a lot of our business is very heavily influenced by American investment banking. So beware of it, and beware of how it can impact you in other areas. You know, fixed-term deposits from local authorities. Looking at the Fraud Act, if a chief executive of finance calls your fixed deposits desk and said, what can you get me on 30 million for 3 months? He's not asking what you can do for me. By inference and by law, he's asking what's the best you can get me. Now, if you know that actually, again, Citi are going to pay X percent, but Paul at Goldman's going to pay 5 basis points above that, 5 bips above that. So you give it to Citi and tell him to pass it on to Goldman's, and you'll split the 2.5 between the three of you. You split the 5 between the 3 of you. That's fraud. Because the local authority, when they ask, what can you get me, they're not asking, what can you do for me and yourself. You are paid by the bank, not me. By definition, they're asking you for the best. And I don't know, because I don't take fixed term deposits, but I know lots of people and I can have sidebar conversations. There are many things that have taken place in the City of London that were once standard market practice that are now crimes. It may be, and I just suggest that there are many things taking place in the City of London that may actually be crimes or will in future become crimes. It's based upon trust. And as Hector Sant said, the problem with bankers is they've lost the trust of the general public. Personally, I'm not sure the FSA have gained it back either, but that's another story. So we move to the risks. The risks are not drugs. The risks are market fiscal crimes, and the risks to you are lack of training. One of the reasons you're here, one of the reasons you engage with Walters Clers is to identify what solutions may be available to improve your control environment. And a critical element of your control environment, in fact, the critical element of your control environment is your culture and your training. Poor controls and no policy and procedures. I remember many years ago, and again I keep reflecting back anecdotally to my policing days, just before I left the police, there's a company called Detica. Many of you may be familiar with Detica. They are a security company that help garner information. They place cameras, they have IT surveillance, etc., etc. And they were the provider of choice for cameras in banks to prevent armed robberies, or at least take a photograph of the armed robber in action to arrest him and then prevent him committing another one. And in the 1990s, police used to go to maybe 5 different premises each day to collect evidence from the Detica cameras. And by the time I left in 2001, that had gone down to about 5 premises per week. The dynamic had changed considerably. And I remember Detica had a product at the time, a voice recognition or a word recognition product that you could put on your recorded lines. And if you had a corporate finance mandate for a particular M&A transaction and you recorded the client's name into that, you could say, okay, the following people should be talking about that. Anybody could talk about it, but we'd really like to know in what context they are talking about it. So this enthusiastic, quite passionate, crazy guy proposed this to some people in the bank where he worked, and they looked at him like he was mad. And I got the sense that people know inside, or at that time, people knew insider trading took place. It was a detail that would hurt them. So they didn't want the detail. I'm pleased to say that during my research for the ICA piece on financial crime in the wholesale markets, a major European house has adopted that very, very product now. And that product sits across their recorded lines, and they use it in exactly that context. I'm pleased for two reasons. It shows that I'm thinking about the right things at times, and I don't always get it wrong. And it also shows a huge cultural shift in the way our senior managers view this. One guy I worked for, he was a head of a bank, the wholesale bank and the European head of the particular bank. He said to me, Martin, when I die, I leave two things behind. He said, I leave a sad family, not because I want them to be sad, but I want them to miss me because I know that I had a good time with me, and my reputation. And nobody, Martin, will bugger about with my reputation. That's his words, not mine. But people are putting different values to this now. That, reputation's far more important than yet another million in your bank account. Your vulnerabilities are poor KYC. Michael, how am I doing for time? Am I okay? Good. Our poor KYC, complex and multi-layered corporate structures, and in some ways, we can look back at former cases of Enron, WorldCom, where they were manipulating things using massive numbers of structures that nobody was really behind. Tax havens. But when I say tax havens, please, folks, understand what a tax haven is. And London is the world's biggest offshore tax haven. Okay, so a tax haven is not necessarily Isle of Man. New York is the second biggest tax haven in the world because they're offshore to everywhere else. They're the world's two biggest offshore financial services centres. And here's something that may blow your mind, because it blew mine. It made me think, I must be stupid because this has been going on for years. But it didn't, because I did some research. I did quite a lot of research with knowledgeable people, far more knowledge than me. Did you know, in the United Kingdom, you today can go to a company's house and incorporate a company and take bearer shares on that company? I see somebody open his eyes wider. Yeah, I have an account with Companies House, we do research, so I phoned them straight away. I said, I'm looking at a document that I think must be mistyped, and it was a 2010 document. Companies House will give you a company with bearer shares. What does that mean to you? What does that mean in terms of your risk management, your risk profile? The UK has this apparent legitimacy to its business. So here's somebody at the front telling the world's number one offshore tax haven is London. The UK will issue bearer shares. It changes the dynamic, hopefully, in some of your thinking, or makes you say the guy at the front's mad. Weak Chinese walls will seriously hurt you, particularly if you can't evidence the strength of them. And bullies, money, power, bonuses, they will damage you. A lot of our banks are run by alpha males, and excuse me, ladies, sometimes females who have an alpha male wrapped up inside their body somewhere. And it's a lot of these people are bullies. They assert what they want, and they get what they want. Because everything we do in investment banking criteria is consciously or subconsciously assessed against how that will impact upon our bonus assessment for the 12-month micro time period in which we operate. We're a short-term business, we're not long-term. And people who have power to influence your bonuses may do so. So there is a correlation between our remuneration policies and our compliance policies. And again, that will drive, because actually as investigators look more and more at this and they begin to understand the mechanics and the dynamics of investment banking, they'll begin to question the logic of what we do, particularly in the US, where law enforcement as against regulators are much more involved, and where the regulator has changed considerably, not least because of the Dodd-Frank Act. And corruption and PEPs will also have a massive impact upon you because they have lots of the above. They are bullies, they have money, they have power. Not all PEPs, of course, but the PEPs we see that bring the problems to the doorsteps of our banks are bullies. Then we have the domino effect, and how it comes to us with, again, is it market abuse? Am I talking about insider trading? Of course, I'm talking far more about market abuse than I am about insider trading. The retail mortgage fraud, it was standard practice in this country that people would bump up your salary to get you the mortgage. That you may have seen the advert on the tube at the moment talking about The Economist, that in the 1980s you were once paid £4,500 a year to go to university. Now you'll pay £9,000 a year to attend the university. And in the 1980s, the average cost of a house in London was 3.5 times the average salary. Now it's 9 times the average salary. And of course, given the fact that people in finance have done very well, the average salary in London is a lot bigger than it once was. But for many, many years, when you've wanted that house that's slightly out of your reach, they have bumped your salary up. Standard operating procedure. That has a knock-on effect to mortgage-backed securities, because actually it's not as it was once seen to be. And there was a whistleblower who said to Congress that the rating agencies regularly manipulated the rating of the mortgage-backed securities for the benefit of the actual paying client, not for the investing parties. So retail mortgage fraud has a knock-on effect, because ultimately you're selling structured products through your desks they contain a manipulated piece of information or price. Wachovia and Golden West in 2006, 2007, Wachovia bought Golden West. The weekend before the actual sale was finalised, one of Wachovia's very senior executives sold 1 million Wachovia shares. The SEC, I don't know if they finished their investigation, but they haven't brought any case against that. But another point about Wachovia and Golden West, it was known, or it's suggested it was known, it's alleged it was known, that Golden West regularly engaged in that practice of increasing people's salaries artificially to secure on a mortgage, which places a bigger risk on the mortgage provider, which in this instance was Golden West, which is about to be bought by Wachovia, and Wachovia's money comes from its shareholders. So did Wachovia's management tell the shareholders what we're doing? Do you see how all this comes together? To see this is impacting the share price of Wachovia? The shareholders may or may not have been told all the full information. People are responsible for properly disseminating that information. If they're withholding that information to maintain their own share price, then that's an abuse.